Hello and welcome to another dyno video, and the first time a TVR has been on the dyno. This is the first time I've put a TVR on the dyno, and everyone is, well, I say everyone, that's... Those of you watching will be thinking, oh, this is good, this is the first time one of those has been on it. We've seen TVRs in the background in these videos, but never actually seen one on the dyno. This is when the numbers are going to go up. We had an S-Max recently doing 210 horsepower. We had Auto Shenanigans brought his BMW down here, did 230. What V8 engine does this have in it? How high is this going to be on the board? Surely this is going to shoot to the top. No, it won't. The reason it won't shoot to the top is because this doesn't have a V8 engine in it. This is a TVR, well, it's just known as a TVR S. That's it. It's just a TVR S. Or when the S evolved and became the S2, this, by definition, became known as the S1, or S series, to cover the whole range. So, yeah, why is this not going to be fighting near the top? In fact, the thumbnail on this video is very likely going to say the TVR with less power than a Fiesta. And that's not meant as a disparaging thing. It's actually probably likely. I haven't run this car up yet, but I've got some pretty good guesses as to where the numbers are going to be with this. Why? How? What? Well, let me tell you. The TVR S was launched in, well, prototype models came out in 1986. Really, sales got going in 1987. This, I believe, is an 88, but it is quite an early car. It's on an E-Reg. And it is one of the more early examples you'll see. It's got the dashboard. I can tell you the dashboard is early because it has a digital clock. Yeah, the early ones had digital and the later ones had analog. It also has the worst windscreen wipers you'll ever see on a car, and it has the worst mirrors you'll ever see on a car. These mirrors are hopeless. They're completely useless. But you can't kind of judge everything on practicalities. You have to look at the package, and the package is about having fun. So you're now asking, well, so how are you going to have fun if it hasn't got much power? Well, look at everything in context. The engine in this car is the 2.8 litre Ford Cologne V6 with mechanical fuel injection. It's basically the K-Jet system that is used, or it is the engine as it's taken from a Ford Capri 2.8 injection. So that means it should have 160 horsepower, and it should make a lovely noise, apparently. And it should propel this sub 1,000 kilo sports car along to 60 mile an hour in around 7 odd seconds and put a big smile on your face. So there are two ways of looking at this. The first way is to be kind of a little bit negative. And we'll start by doing that because it's me and I like to be negative. The negative side of this car is the engine. The very early S's, the S, which became the S1, had the 2.8 litre Ford Cologne V6. The later models had the 2.9 litre Ford Cologne V6, and while that isn't an amazing engine either, it is an improvement. These engines are known for not quite delivering on the power figures. So the figure, and this is actually one of those rare instances where TVR aren't lying. TVR aren't making these numbers up. They've taken the numbers from Ford. It's Ford who are lying. They quoted the Capri 2.8 at 160 horsepower, so TVR duly took that 160 horsepower figure, the one they'd actually been using in the Tasman and the 280i, the wedges, which were the first cars to use this engine in the TVR range, and they just ran with that number because that's the one Ford came up with. But it's not exactly true, is it? In fact, you can smell a rat straight away, because if you look at the Ford Capri 2.8 injection, the power figures listed for that 160 horsepower. If you look at the Ford Sierra XR4i, which has the same engine, it's listed at 150 horsepower. People will tell you, people will say, the reason it's listed like that is because the Capri has a less restrictive exhaust. It has dual exhaust, is less restrictive, and apparently that makes 10 horsepower. No, that is bollocks. Not even close. The most restrictive thing on these engines is the cylinder heads. It's nothing to do with the exhaust. The funniest bit of this, or the most ironic side of this, is that of all the 2.8 litre Cologne engine cars I've had on the dyno, and I've had quite a few, the highest performing one was a Sierra with the 150 horsepower. Not the Capris or the TVRs or anything, which are supposed to have 160. The Sierra actually produced my father-in-law's car actually produced 142, which, well, I mean, I literally spoke to a guy at Burton Power about a couple of weeks later on something unrelated about a part I needed for a TVR. And we were talking about power figures, and I said I had a Sierra on it at 142, and he was flabbergasted. Really? What have you done to that? Getting bogged down in the power figures is not really what this is about, though. The S, you need to think of this not as a big, sort of hairy-chested V8 TVR Griffith or whatever type car. This is not that. This was a cheap car. This car kind of saved TVR. If it wasn't for the S, you probably wouldn't have the Griffith and the Chimera that came after it, because the Wedge wasn't selling very well. The S was a lot quicker to build and therefore a lot cheaper to sell. You could buy these for $12,995. $12,995. That's like Golf GTI money, I suppose. I'm pretty sure MG Montegos are about that kind of money. And for that, you're getting 160 horsepower, more like 130. Sub 1,000 kilos, nice soundtrack. You've got this little sports car. Think of it more as kind of like a slightly leirier MGB rival, although it does, post-date the MGB slightly. But think of it like that. Almost size-wise, it's not far from an MX-5. In terms of refinement and build and handling and everything like that, it's quite a long way behind an MX-5. But price-wise, it's not. And when you think of TVRs, you think of sort of Porsche rivals. By the end, the Sagaris was like, what, 70,000? Something like that. So this is a different kind of market, if you like, for this car. They did do a V8 version of the S later on, and it was more money. And they are actually a lot of fun. They are a good bit more powerful than this. So how powerful is this, and why is it not as powerful as it's supposed to be? To open the bonnet on a TVR S, you do not pull the bonnet release, because the bonnet release does the boot. Also, when you pull the bonnet release, only one side will pop open, and then you have to wiggle it around until it pops open. And also on this one, the bonnet stays on the left-hand side because it's early and because TVR. Obviously, you would just put it on the left, wouldn't you? On the opposite side and you can't open it fully because it hits the ground, so you have to put it there. So, although this looks a little bit fancier than your average 2.8 Ford Cologne V6, that is what that is. It is, a little bit blinged up. This car's actually had a lot of work done to it. The chassis has been refurbished. Now, I know that because I refurbished it, and actually about 10 years ago, and it still looks really good. It's had a lot of custom work done to it, and it's in fine fettle. You won't find many in as good a condition as this one, to be honest. Only about 51,000 miles on it as well, I think. So, because you wouldn't use these. If you see what the heater and the wipers and everything are like on these cars, you wouldn't use it as a daily. Why is this engine so restrictive? Well, there are a number of reasons. First off, it's quite an old V6. It's a 60-degree, all-iron, pushrod, overhead valve, basic V6. It's basically the German version of an Essex, although it's not actually showing any parts with an Essex engine or anything major with an Essex V6. It's the same sort of thing. It's kind of weird that they had both versions, to be honest. But the key difference with a Cologne over an Essex, or a 2.8 Cologne, is, if I put the light on, I don't know if you can see it there. So we have an exhaust branch here, and we have another one here, and, that's it. Let's go around the other side. Right, so how does that work? You've got a V6 engine with a 2-branch manifold each side. Why? Because 2 of the cylinders share an exhaust port. Why? Well, it's not like the exhaust port for the shared cylinders is bigger either. It's not oval. It's the same size as the opposite one. And it's basically because Ford are being cheap. They wanted to use the same exhaust headers and the same kind of configuration and everything on the V4 version of this engine, which was a 1.8 or a 2 litre, I think. They wanted to be able to use some of the same components. I mean, how awfully penny pinching is that? This is why, Ford, I was going to say this is why no one likes you, but they do. You're very popular. I can't think why, to be honest, with this kind of thing. However, we take all that to one side, we look at the engine, we say, it's only the real world, this engine, I think, will produce, my estimate now is about 130. A good 30 horsepower down on what it's supposed to. And you've probably sat there now thinking, that's horrendous, that's awful, blah, blah, blah. Well, yeah, it's not great. But there are different ways of looking at this. one of the ways of looking at this, as I say, is this is a sub 1 ton, rear-wheel drive, 2-seater, 2-door, open-top sports car. 130 horsepower doesn't sound a huge amount, but in those days, 130 horsepower was actually okay. That's what a 205 GTI made. Okay, a 205 GTI was a bit lighter, but that's what a 205 GTI made. And we're going to go back to this thing. I'm going to do some videos on this in the future because you get a lot of people slagging off the old American engines, the old American V8s and things like that, saying how rubbish they are because they only make 200 horsepower and it's a 5 litre. That's missing the point. That's missing the point. And I think this engine, although it's a smaller version of this, I think it's the same kind of behaviour pattern. So what you get with this is instead of having a peaky engine, instead of having an engine that does nothing, and then goes off on one like a VTEC or something like that, and then hits a high power figure and then drops off when you change gear, this one comes up, I think, earlier and is broader. So a good 500 RPM before this thing hits its peak power, it might only be producing 10, 15 horsepower less, whereas a smaller engine that revs higher might be producing 25, 30 horsepower less. Meaning if you sort of drive them back to back, take the figures out of the equation on paper, look at the data on the dyno and drive them back to back, and you see actually there's the peak power figure doesn't tell you the whole story. These engines are very mid-rangey, they're very flexible. They do not like revving. This will not rev. I don't think this will pull past 5,000 revs. They're not a high revving engine. They're not particularly torquey. They're just kind of, they're there. They're just like a tool for the job. And because it's in this car and because TVR were quite good at making cars sound quite good, they've made a good job of making these sound quite nice. So it does sound quite good. It has a character. It might not be the fastest thing in the world, but it performs its task, and certainly as a classic car, which is what this now is, more than adequately. The other good thing with these engines is because it's not highly stressed, this thing will go on for miles and miles and miles. We did a rebuild on one of these cars. It had done about 200,000 miles, I think, maybe more than that. Maybe it was about 250,000 miles. Guy had owned it since nearly new. And we sent the engine off for a rebuild to a Ford Cologne specialist, and I said, how many miles do you reckon that's done? And his guess was 70,000. Because he didn't see them in with that kind of mileage on them very often. It's because they're so tough. It's a very tough, reliable engine. It's, yeah, okay, it's not going to pull the, well, skin off a rice pudding. It's not going to go ripping down the road, but that's kind of missing the point a little bit. You're asking a bigger, more flexible, more laid-back engine to do the same job as a smaller, higher, more highly strung, more higher revving engine. The bigger, lazier one is going to be more reliable. Not going to be more frugal. Yeah, let's bring the noise, because that's what this basically does. This makes a lot of noise, puts a bit of a smile on your face, and goes down the road. It doesn't go down the road quickly, it just goes down the road. Place your bets. What do you reckon? If you know these engines, this is basically, as I say, same spec as a Capri or Sierra or Granada. I think my gut feeling is going to be between the 130, 135. So much so, I am going to put that it's got less power than a Fiesta in the thumbnail of the video, and if that proves to be wrong, I'm going to have to put an asterisk in there, and then some kind of like qualifying statement in the blurb underneath it, because I thought it would have less. And also, my TVR S that I put on here did have less than the ZTEC S Fiesta I'm comparing this to. So, yeah. That's why I'm guessing that way. Right, enough talk. Noise. I mean power. I'm going to put another microphone behind the car for the noise, because I care, you know what I mean? I'm generous like that. Right, I'll turn this off. That sounded quite nice. It used to be a lot quieter, this car, but I think the exhaust is bedded in. So, are we ready? Oh, wow! Wow! Now that is impressive. I mean, a lot of people are watching this going, no, it's not. It's a 2.8 V6 and it's done 148. That's not impressive. No, that is impressive. That is pretty much what the Sierra XR4 is supposed to make. And in fairness, I mentioned earlier on that the best cologne I'd had on here to date had done 142, and it was an XR4i. But that was under the SAE correction standard. DIN wins you a little bit more on a rolling road dyno. Under SAE, 142 would be about 145, I would say, under DIN. The book figure on a TVR S is 160. It's done 148.5. 157 pound-foot of torque. That is about there or thereabouts, I think. I'm pretty sure that's where they're supposed to be. But, as I say, this engine in a Sierra is 150. And the one thing this does have over a Sierra is those exhaust headers, the ACT header set that it's got, tubular headers. The Sierra that was on here, bog standard with the cast iron log manifolds. So that could account for a little bit of difference there. But as I say, the heads themselves are the main hindrance. But that is quite impressive. I know everyone's looking at this going, no, it's not. Yes, it is. For a 2.8 Cologne, bog standard, that's really good. A bit of a fluff here. Let's get the revs back up. What was it doing? So just over 2,500, a bit of a flutter. But it was strong. And you see what I mean? It's broad. It's not going up like this. It's kind of, 5,500. It had peaked at 140. In fact, was it still going? Was it still going? We'll try it to 6 next time. But, yeah, it might get to the 150, This has completely rewritten everything that I've ever known about Cologne V6s. All the ones, I won on here once, did 113. I kid you not. So, this is really impressive. What's that? It's 5,500 revs at 148. So 500 revs earlier, it's still at what, 143? So there's not much difference there. And again, a few hundred revs earlier. If this was a high revving engine, it would be kind of like this. It would be like a few hundred revs earlier, you'd be down here somewhere. So it gives this kind of like flexible, torquey nature. The thing with these cars, the funny thing with these engines is they don't have any kick. They don't have any guts. They just feel a bit flat when you drive them. But that's probably because it's a really linear power delivery. It's probably because it's a broad graph like that. It's not kicking you in the back because it's kind of already working, if that makes sense. There's no sudden rush forward. In fact, if anything, it dies off. It's the opposite to the Focus ST that was on here the other day, the ST170 rather, which was the other way around. The kink kind of went like that and then went up like that. And that's the same with most 16 valves or twin cam 4-cylinders. Well, the owner, Nigel, he's going to be very happy. Very, very happy, and he should be. Although one thing I would say with it is the rear tyres are so badly out of shape. It's shaking itself to bits. And these are things you don't notice on the road. You only notice them on the rollers are perfectly balanced and smooth. So you noticed any little imperfection on the road, you probably wouldn't spot it. Well, let's run it again. I'm going to hang on until 6,000. I'm pretty sure the book figure peaks at 5.8. So I'll hang on until 6, see if it hits the 150. For one of them, that would be very, very good. Very, very good. So, if you've got one of these, don't think, oh, yeah, mine will do that. It probably won't. So mine did 132 once. So, I don't know what's going on with that. Right, let's try it again. 6,000 revs. And I'm going to put the camera at the back this time so you can see the noise. Are we ready? Oh. Yeah. So I went a bit higher. She had no more to give. I mean, it was kind of holding it, but it wasn't increasing. We've dropped 146. Same kind of torque. It's still got that flutter down there at 2,500 as well. But okay, all right. Well, to be honest with you, if you'd done this run and got 146 first time out, I'd have been elated. So yeah, it's weird to be dejected at 146 out of one of these, but that is good. So we'll say 148 then was its best. When we put it onto the website, into the tables, it would go down as 148. Still, some way down, and probably not. It's probably going to be a worse percentage, than the Sierra, because the quoted book figure is 160. The Sierra's is 150. Even though the Sierra's made less power, it's probably closer in percentage terms to its book than this is. So Ford have done TVR dirty, because if they just told him it was 150, like it blatantly is, they'd be all right. But yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Well done, little TVR. There we go. TVR S, 148 from a 2.8 TVR S. I've done a 2.9 before. That's also on the leaderboard. Yeah, I've done an S2. That was bog standard. That was a 2.9. That made 163. So a good deal more than that one. But don't knock that. I know, yeah, some people might be watching and going, that doesn't seem that great. No, that's good. Trust me, for one of them, that's amazing. So yeah, cheers for watching. Go and check out the website. All the lists of all the cars I've done are on there, and we are adding to There's no we, it's just me. I'm adding to it all the time. The list is growing and growing. So yeah, have a look. Your car might be on there, or not. If it's not, you could offer it.